Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of Prelims Warm Up. In this initiative, we are discussing 5 important questions which had appeared in the previous year UPSC Prelims examination. This initiative has been brought to you by Aptiplus Academy for Civil Services. My name is Shayak Datta and I am the faculty for Geography and Environment at Aptiplus Academy for Civil Services. So let us see the first question for today. The first question, so today again I have focused mainly on the 2019 prelims paper. The first question that we have is from economics. So in India, which of the following review the independent regulators in sectors like in independent regulators in sectors like telecommunication, insurance, electricity, etc. So the question is asking in India, which of the following review the independent regulators in sectors like telecommunication, insurance, electricity, etc. So you have been provided with 5 such bodies. Number 1, the ad hoc committee which has been set up by the parliament. So ad hoc committee set up by the parliament. Number 2, parliamentary department related standing committee. Number 3, the finance commission. Number 4, financial sector legislative reforms commission. And number 5, Niti Aayog. So you have been asked out of these 5, which of the following, out of these 5, they review the independent regulators in sectors, for example, telecommunication like TRAI, insurance, electricity, etc. So the options which have been given are A, 1 and 2, that is ad hoc committee set up by the parliament, and 2 is parliamentary department related standing committee. 1, 3 and 4, that is ad hoc committee and finance commission and financial sector legislative reforms commission. And then you have 3, 4 and 5, that is finance commission, financial sector legislative reforms commission and Niti Aayog. And finally you have 2 and 5. 2 is the parliamentary department related standing committee and 5 is Niti Aayog. So out of the following we get to see that out of the following bodies we get to see that it definitely cannot be Niti Aayog who is supposed to look after the independent regulators. So it is not Niti Aayog. Similarly, we can strike off finance commission as well. So you see, if you strike off finance commission, then this automatically is getting struck off, this particular option. Similarly, as you might be aware, Niti Aayog, it is not related to looking after or reviewing the independent regulators. So that is why even D and C you can strike off and you are left with only A, 1 and 2. So the correct answer in this case is A. This particular question was a little bit on the more difficult side. The right answer is A, 1 and 2, that is ad hoc committee which has been set up by the parliament, or another thing is the parliamentary department related standing committee. So these are the 2 bodies which are responsible for reviewing the independent regulators in various sectors. So let us have a look at the explanation. The answer should be A. The department related standing committees. What are these? The committee system of parliament. It is often used in several countries for oversight of regulators. Okay, the committee system of parliament that is often used in various countries for oversight of regulators. For example, in case of India, there are 24 department related standing committees that comprise members from both the houses of the parliament, both the Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha. So you'll find members belonging to or people belonging to both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha being members of these department related standing committees. Now these committees, they are ministry specific and they may review the working of regulators within their respective departments. Similarly, ad hoc committees, they are temporary, as you can understand from the name itself. Ad hoc means temporary committees and they perform some specific task. The ad hoc committees, they dissolve once that task is done. So an ad hoc committee is basically set up for a very specific task, but once that task gets completed, automatically the committee gets dissolved. Now these committees, they are ministries specific again, and they review the working of regulators within their respective department. So I believe the explanation is quite clearly understandable and it is very clear, and you can understand that it is the ad hoc committees and the department related standing committees which are responsible for reviewing the working of independent regulators in various departments. Here we have a little bit more insights regarding the ad hoc committee. The Parliament may establish ad hoc committees which may examine the working of regulators. For instance, the terms of reference of the JPC or the Joint Parliamentary Committee on the allocation of 2G spectrum, it included the review of the policy on spectrum, pricing, and the grant of telecom licenses. So an ad hoc committee was set up, and this ad hoc committee, it is like a joint parliamentary committee which was set up based mainly to deal with the allocation of the 2G spectrum, and their work or their main objective was to review the policy on spectrum pricing and the grant of telecom licenses. Another example of parliamentary oversight through ad hoc committee, it is the scrutiny of the working of SEBI and RBI by the Joint Parliamentary Committee on the Stock Market Scam. So this is also an example of an ad hoc committee which was mainly set up to scrutinize the working of independent regulators like SEBI, like RBI. So this Joint Parliamentary Committee, it was mainly set up to look at the working of SEBI and RBI, especially with respect to stock market scam. Similarly, we'll get to see two parliamentary committees on finance, which exercise oversight of regulators. For example, one such parliamentary committee is the Committee on Estimates, and the other is the Public Accounts Committee. So the Committee on Estimates and the Public Accounts Committee, these are two committees which are parliamentary committees, and they also exercise oversight over the regulators. The Committee on Estimates, what is its function? It reviews budgetary estimates of government departments. Okay. The Committee on Estimates, which is a parliamentary committee, what is its main function? To review the budgetary estimates of the government departments, and such estimates include the budget of regulators also. So automatically it is reviewing the functioning of the regulators as well. Most laws establishing independent regulators, it requires the CAG or the Comptroller and Auditor General to prepare annual audit reports on the accounts of the regulators. These reports are tabled before the Parliament and they are reviewed by the PAC or the Public Accounts Committee. The PAC or the Public Accounts Committee, it may require the regulators' officers to depose before the committee. For instance, the chairman and senior officers of SEBI, they deposed before the Parliamentary Accounts Committee as when it was examining the working of SEBI. But on the other hand, we get to see Finance Commission, the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, and Niti Aayog. They have no role to play in the reviewing of the independent regulators. Okay. So on the whole, again, it's not necessary to be aware about each and every case where there was a ad hoc committee set up to look into a specific issue as such. But if you are keeping a track of the newspapers, you will be aware of most of these things. So parliamentary committees and ad hoc committees, they look into the workings of independent regulators, not the Finance Commission, not the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, and neither the Niti Aayog. Now moving on to the second question for the day, this is again from economics, and here we get to see, with reference to India's 5-year plans, which of the following statement are correct? Okay, again asked in the year 2019. 5-year plans, it is a part of your economics. There are 3 statements which have been given and you have to find out which one is correct. First statement is, from the second 5-year plan, there was a determined thrust towards substitution of basic and capital good industries. So from the second 5-year plan, there was an increased emphasis towards substitution of basic and capital goods industries. For example, the second 5-year plan, which is also called as the Mahalanobis plan. So from then on, there was a determined thrust towards substitution of basic and capital good industries. Is that correct? Definitely, that is correct. The second statement is stating that the fourth 5-year plan, it adopted the objective of correcting the earlier trend of increased concentration of wealth and economic power. The fourth 5-year plan, it adopted the objective of correcting the earlier trend of increased concentration of wealth and economic power. Is that correct? Yes. We also get to see the fifth 5-year plan. For the first time, the financial sector was included as an integral part of the plan. Now let us see this particular statement, that is the third statement. So the first 2 statements are definitely correct. So 1 and 2 should be the right answer. But the third statement, which says that in the fifth 5-year plan, for the very first time, the financial sector was included as an integral part of the plan, Is that correct? No, that is not. So let us see the explanation part. First statement is correct, as you can understand. India adopted the strategy of import substitution industrialization. So basic idea was this: okay, we will try to reduce our imports in order to ensure that we do not lose our foreign exchange reserves, and we will try to substitute the whatever goods we are importing. We'll try to make that within India itself, something which you can relate to Make in India. Like we have this program called as Make in India. So similarly, the concept of import substitution industrialization, this strategy was adopted from the second five-year plan itself in the 50s. The chief objective was to build a self-reliant economy. And nowadays also we get to see our Honorable Prime Minister talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat. From the second five-year plan, there was a determined thrust towards substitution of basic and capital goods industries. The ISI strategy was based on the model of growth as propounded by Mahatma Gandhi. Coming to the second statement is also correct, and it says that the fourth five-year plan, it provided a necessary corrective to the earlier trend, which helped particularly the stronger sections in agriculture as well as in industry to enable them rapidly to enlarge and diversify the production base. In the long run, the full potential of growth cannot be realized unless the energies of all our people are put to profitable use. The emphasis on spreading the impetus and benefits of economic growth to the weaker sections is thus necessary in the interest of equality as well as growth. The plan will now assist the less prosperous sections of our farming population to improve their position and make a yet bigger contribution to the national economy. So basically in this fourth five-year plan, we get to see it tried to move away from all the strategies which involved the concentration of wealth and the concentration, like here we get to see the second statement was saying that there was increased concentration of wealth and economic power, and in this fourth five-year plan, it tried to correct this issue. Okay, so mainly it was meant to spread out the impetus and ensure that there is equitable growth everywhere. Third statement, it is not correct because the financial sector became an integral part of the plan in the ninth five-year plan. Remember this, that the financial sector, it became an integral part of the five-year plan from the ninth five-year plan, but in the statement provided, it was mentioned as fifth five-year plan. So that is incorrect. It should be ninth five-year plan. So your right answer is A, 1 and 2 only. Now moving to the third question. This is from Polity and Governance, and the third question is, with reference to the Constitution of India, consider the following statements. And there are two statements which have been provided. Number 1, no high court shall have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally invalid. So the first statement is saying, okay, no high court shall have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally invalid. Is that correct? That is incorrect, because earlier we get to see that there was such provision. An amendment was made in the constitution to insert an article, and which said that no high court shall actually have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally valid. But later on we get to see that that amendment, it was taken out, and similarly the article is now repealed. So the first statement is incorrect. The second statement, an amendment to the Constitution of India cannot be called into question by the Supreme Court of India. An amendment to the Constitution of India cannot be called into question by the Supreme Court of India. Now, is that correct? That is also incorrect, because it can be called into question by the Supreme Court of India if it is violating the basic features of the Constitution, which has been established in the Keshavananda Bharati case. So both the statements which have been given, they are incorrect, and the right answer should be D, neither one nor two. Let us look at the explanation. So answer is D. And the first statement, which said that no high court shall have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally invalid. Let us see over here. In the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, the first 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, which inserted a lot of changes. So what it did was it also inserted a new article, which is 228A. Article 228A was inserted as a part of the 42nd Amendment Act, Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. After Article 228 of the Constitution, special provisions as to the disposal of questions relating to constitutional validity of state laws. So what did this particular 228A article talk about? It said that no high court shall have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally invalid. So this is what the Article 228A was talking about. Okay, no high court shall have the jurisdiction to declare any central law to be constitutionally invalid. But so this was as per the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. But we get to see that the 43rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1977, it restored the original position, which means that this Article 228A, it was repealed, and even today if you see, this is no longer there. So the first statement is incorrect, okay, because the article which talked about it, that is no longer there, it is repealed. Similarly, the second statement which talked about, okay, an amendment to the Constitution of India cannot be called into question by the Supreme Court of India. So that is also incorrect, because in the Keshavananda Bharati case which happened in 1973, we get to see the Supreme Court, it laid down a new doctrine. What is it? It is the basic structure, sometimes also referred to the as the basic features of the Constitution. Okay, basic structure, also called as the basic feature of the Constitution. So it's very important that you realize that this term or this phrase of basic structure of or basic feature of the Constitution, this was introduced in the Keshavananda Bharati case of 1973. What did it say? It ruled that the constituent power of Parliament under Article 368 can amend the Constitution, but such amendments should not alter the basic structure of the Constitution. Anything that ultra-vires the Constitution is cut down by the highest judiciary, including the Constitution Amendment. So the thing is, yes, so long as it is not violating the basic feature or the basic structure of the Constitution, it is allowed, but no amendment, no constitutional amendment can result in the violation of the basic structure. If that happens, then the Supreme Court has the authority to ensure that it does not happen. So an amendment, it can be called into question by the Supreme Court if it is violating the basic structure or the basic feature of the Constitution. Okay, let us move on to the fourth question. Again, it is a question from economics, and there are two statements which have been given. The first statement is saying that the purchasing power parity exchange rates are calculated by comparing the prices of the same basket of goods and services in different countries. So it is talking about purchasing power parity, and it is saying purchasing power parity exchange rates, it can be calculated by comparing the prices of the same basket of goods and services in different countries. Is that correct? Yes. Second statement, in terms of purchasing power parity dollars, India is the 6th largest economy in the world. Now, is that correct? That is not correct, because you see today's date is 25th of June, and we get to see yesterday there was a news, that is on the 24th of June, there was a news which said that as per 2017, India has once again been able to retain its position as the 3rd largest economy in the world as per PPP, that is purchasing power parity. On the basis of that, India has been able to retain its rank of being the 3rd country in the world and 3rd largest economy in the world. The first is China, second is USA, and third is India in terms of purchasing power parity. Okay, so the second statement is incorrect, because India is not the 6th largest economy. Earlier also it used to be the 3rd, and even now it is the 3rd largest economy. The first statement is correct, so the correct answer should be A, 1 only. So the correct answer is A, 1 only. And in purchasing power parity PPP exchange rate, the rate at which the currency of one country would have to be converted into that of another country to buy the same amount of goods and services in each country. Okay, in purchasing power parity exchange rate, what is taken into account? The rate at which the currency of one country would have to be converted into that of another country to buy the same amount of goods and services in each country. For example, if a burger is selling in India for ₹100, the same burger, if it is selling, let's say, for $2 in New York, then what would be the PPP exchange rate between rupee and dollar? So this would imply that the PPP exchange rate would be $1 is equal to 50 rupees. $1 is equal to 50 rupees if so what does that imply? That basically implies, for example, here you can see if a burger it is selling for rupees 100, then it will sell for, and if it is selling for the same burger, if it is selling for $2, then that implies that the PPP exchange rate is equal to $1 is equal to rupees 50. So the first statement is correct. When it comes to the second statement, on the PPP basis, that is the purchasing power parity basis, China is the world's largest economy. Similarly, total wealth of China, it is estimated to be 25.3 trillion international dollars. China is followed by United States with figures of $19.4 trillion, and India, it is the third largest economy in terms of PPP. So just remember the ranking. The figures are not important. What is important is the ranking. So China, then USA, then India in terms of PPP, the largest economies in the world. The last question that we have, okay, this is from geography. So with reference to the cultivation of Kharif crops, so agriculture section of geography, with reference to the cultivation of Kharif crops, in which in the last 5 years, consider the following statements. So there have the 4 statements have been given, and you have to consider these 4 statements with respect to what has taken place in the last 5 years. First statement, area under rice cultivation is the highest. Now, is that correct? Definitely. If you look at the various Kharif crops in India, the area under cultivation for rice has to be the highest. So statement number 1 is definitely correct. Statement number 2, area under the cultivation of jowar is more than that of oilseeds. Area under cultivation of jowar is more than that of oilseeds. Now, is that correct? Now, to answer this kind of question, it becomes very, very tough. Until and unless you have the data, it becomes really tough. And where will you find the data? Now, this data can be found in the economic survey. And that too, if you memorize, now it's very difficult to memorize each and every data. But let us just see. For example, area under the cultivation of jowar is more than that of oilseeds. Now again, it is not possible if you don't know the data. Let us have a look at the data. Just for your understanding purpose, this particular data can be found in the economic survey of 2017-18, volume 2, chapter 7 on agriculture, and there you have to look at the reference table 3. Okay, so you can also look at it yourself, economic survey 2017-18 and volume 2, chapter 7 on agriculture, and in this chapter 7 you look at table 3. There you will get some idea. For example, area under rice cultivation is the highest. Here you have the areas under cultivation. So as you can see, for rice it is 43.2 million hectares, which is higher than all the other crops which are grown. So yes, first statement is correct. Area under the cultivation of jowar is more than that of oilseeds. Cultivation of jowar is more than that of oilseeds. Let us see where is jowar. Here you have jowar. Here you have jowar. So you see rice ke liye 43.2 million hectares. You have rice over here. Jowar ke liye 5.1 million hectares. And regarding oil seeds, you have 26.2 million hectares. So this particular statement, it said that area under the cultivation of jowar is more than that of oil seeds. Now here also you can apply your logic. For example, when it comes to oil seeds is a type of cash crop. So naturally you will find that people will, because it brings in a lot of revenue, so people will want to grow oil seeds more than they would want to grow jowar, which basically is grown by very poor families. It's a type of coarse cereal, right? So from this particular comparison also you can understand that this statement, it is incorrect. Okay, under jowar you have 5.1 million hectares and under oilseeds you have 26.2 million hectares. So this particular statement this is correct and this is incorrect. Achha. Now coming to the third statement, area of cotton cultivation is more than that of sugarcane. Area of cotton cultivation is more than that of sugarcane. Let us see. So here we have cotton, which is 10.8 million hectares, and here we have sugarcane, which is 4.4 million hectares. So area of cotton is more than that of sugarcane. Yes, that is correct. So the third statement is also correct. So this third statement that we have, this statement is also correct. Fourth statement, in area under sugarcane cultivation has steadily decreased. Well, we get to see that the government has been trying a lot to promote sugarcane cultivation, to incentivize sugarcane cultivation. So definitely it cannot decrease. It ideally should have increased. So again, first of all, whether it has decreased or not, you would feel it should not have decreased. Similarly, the thing is steadily decrease, that means there has not been a significant decrease as such. So yes, it has not decreased, and here we get to see that the fourth statement is also incorrect, and only statement number 1 and 3 are correct. So our right answer should be A, 1 and 3 only. So out of the given statements, we get to see it is A, 1 and 3 only, which should be the right answer. Okay. So with this, we complete the 5 statements for today. And if you have liked this video, so please like, share, and subscribe to AptPlus's YouTube channel for more such informative videos. And stay tuned for the next video of Prelims Warm Up. Till then, stay safe and take care of yourself. Thank you so much.
I'm an icon, man. And my girl about a 10. I should fuck her in a Benz.